Hi, I'm Sarah Legge, FWCF, and I'm going to talk to you today about how to study for your theory aspect of whichever exams you're going for. And this is about take 20 because I just keep muddling things up, so this is why you should practice. So we're all used to, with a practical exam, having to put time and effort in so that when we're under exam conditions we can perform the task asked of us without going to pieces. And the same basically applies in the theory. If you're not used to writing for 2.5 hours and drawing and thinking clearly, you're probably going to get halfway through your exam and find that your hand cramps, your brain goes fuzzy, and it all goes wrong, which is really not doing yourself any justice. So we have to practice. And again, a bit like the practical aspect, you wouldn't throw yourself into an exam condition without actually having got comfortable with making shoes for a prolonged period of time. So this is how we set about doing that for the theory aspect. So how do we go about studying? It sounds quite a simple question. Well, you just sit down and do it, don't you? But quite often, if you just open a book, you're not actually going to make the best use of your time without having some structure to how you're going to go about it. First thing, find peace and quiet. Now, I appreciate a lot of you are locked up at home at the moment. You haven't even got a forge to hide in. But if you can get a bit of peace and quiet somewhere, gaffer tape children's mouth, lock the wife in the cupboard, then it will make life a little bit easier for you. Pick a topic that interests you to start. If you're not in the way of studying, if you open something boring and heavy, it's not going to go well. So think about a horse that you're dealing with, something that you can relate to and put a bit of personal experience in. Look up that topic, find all the books you've got, read through what they all say. It's amazing how different some of them are. There may be bits that you don't agree with, but justify that to yourself why. Back that up with your anatomy. Look through as many different options as you can. Have a draw. Think about what's involved. So Dobbin's got bone spavin. Have a doodle of the bones and see where the site of that arthritis is and understand it. Make it mean something in your head rather than just I've got to read a book and then I've got to repeat it. While you're going through this, start making notes. Now, I'll talk about revision cards in a minute, but this is the foundation of your revision for later on when you've really got to the point that you're ready for the exam. And also during the exam, when you walk out of the written paper and have a complete brain blank because something threw you in there and you're going to go into the oral and you want to just double check and reassure yourself of what you're talking about, that's when your revision cards are really useful as an emergency backup. When you've done this and your brain is going fuzzy and you're tired, stop. That's the equivalent of being in the forge where you're burning the nth shoe and your hand's cramping and your left arm's falling off and it's going bad to us. There's no point pushing past that point. Have a break. Go back to it, but have a rest. So a little pointer for those of you watching who are out with the UK. This is a UK exam. Something I found quite a lot during the tuition is that those of you in America and other countries, depending on which books you read, you will get different answers for things. It's a UK exam. It's a UK syllabus. Be familiar with that and try and stick to the books recommended so that you don't come back with conflicting answers and then can't understand why the examiners disagree with you. So, talking about revision cards. So you've got into the way of reading a little bit, searching a topic. Hopefully this is getting a bit of a spark going. And then you're writing down cards. So I've got a couple of examples. That is the simple one. These were I did for my associate and they're well thumbed by now and I still refer to them when I want to double check something quickly. So that is an example of what I've done for the bones of the hock. Straightforward, one piece of paper, just A4 card cut in half. So it's a drawing that I can understand. It doesn't necessarily mean an awful lot to anybody else. Some of my notes are in shorthand, but I know what it means and it will reassure me if there's something I want to check. So you get something simple like that, or you may find that you end up with a whole bundle. That's just laminitis. So don't be afraid to add cards to it. This knowledge will gain and grow as you learn more. And sometimes you'll go back and scratch something out and start again because you've realised you've learned past that and you don't agree with it anymore. So over time, what you end up with is a stack like that, or more. And there's things that are so automatic to us we don't worry about writing it down, to be honest. You don't need to, but other things you do. And bearing in mind, when you're referring to these in the exam, you're under pressure and we do really stupid things and we forget really simple things when we're under pressure. So you've gathered up your cards, you're working towards them, you're building on them, you're adding to them, you're practicing your drawing. One of the important things for the exam is to go to the Worshipful Company website, look at the guidance notes to do with the exam you're looking at, Okay, apprentices in the UK, you've kind of got that through your college system, but certainly those looking at the associate, you need to look at it. Read the syllabus. I was in an exam in the modern materials part where we were given a task that a few folk weren't really happy about because they claimed it wasn't on the syllabus. It definitely was. So read it, make sure you're aware of it, know what topics you're going to have to cover. The syllabus was what actually was my guidance for writing those cards. The way I went about those was had the syllabus in front of me, started at the top, worked my way to the bottom, opened every book I had, which was the ones on the reading list, which you'll be glad to know has got a little bit shorter because that's where that library came from, and worked through every book I could, gathered all the information together. Where everything agreed, great. If there was conflict, then I tried to sort it out in my head so that I could defend whichever bit I had felt happy with. That's a lot of work. I'm a geek. There are slightly easier ways of doing it, but it did cover everything. Having gone through the website, you've also got, as I say, the reading list, and there's also guidance notes. Read everything you can to help you prepare so you know what you're going into. So you've studied away, you've got your notes, you know what the syllabus is. Now you need to start putting the pressure on. So we're talking about exam technique. You want to practice starting answering exam questions. The method I used to use was have a question in front of me, answer it off the top of my head, then open all my books and find out what I'd missed, and then answer it with having read that knowledge. So I could see the gaps that I already had, and then I tried to fill those gaps, and that was what I then revised from. So try and fill in the gaps in your knowledge as you go. It's a 2.5 hour written paper, which basically 5 questions gives you half an hour per question, but you can't be writing for 30 minutes for each question. You have to read that question paper when you get it. You have to start on whichever question you feel most comfortable on, because you will relax and the brain starts to work better then. A bit like when you're doing something practically, if you're tense, it doesn't go so well. So pick what you're going to start on. Reread the question. Write your notes. Those notes can gain marks if they're there and they can see them, and you don't put something in the main text and it's there obvious, it will be credited. Do any drawings you need to do. I always used to draw first. I love drawing. They always say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and it lets you get things down that you can then use almost as a script as you start writing if it's an essay answer. Don't exceed your 25 minutes. Allow yourself 25 minutes worth of writing, because that means the extra time will be spent reading the question to start with, making your notes, write your answer, 25 minutes strictly, and then you've still got time to reread your answer, which is quite important. Leave big gaps between paragraphs. You'll always think of something to fill back in, and when you go back at the end of the exam and read back over your paper, and guaranteed there'll be something you think, oh, I forgot that, so write it in. Leave yourself room. If you freeze on a question, move on. Don't sit there, don't let the clock tick down, just move on. Move on to the next question. Take a deep breath, calm yourself, you can go back to it. What types of questions do we get? Well, you can get questions from the Worshipful Company, or you can have somebody like me grill you, and I'll send you questions and then give you feedback on your answers and give you further directions. But the different sort of questions we have keywords in them, and you need to recognise that. So you may have a question that says describe. I may say describe in detail. Now that's definitely going to be an essay question. But describe, and quite often you'll get described with the aid of diagrams. There's very few questions other than list that don't mean diagrams would be helpful. Some specify that they must be there, so make sure there's a diagram. There's very easy ways to lose marks in this exam, and not doing what you're asked is probably the easiest one. You may have a define question. You may have a discuss question, which means your personal opinion needs to come into it, and you need to weigh up arguments. So one of the questions I set recently was 1 stud or 2. Discuss the physiology and function of the limb and how it affects it. So I wanted a little bit of personal experience, and I wanted people to weigh up arguments. You may have a what is question, and a common one is give one, and it'll be an example of something. If it says give one, give one. 3 or 4 won't give you more marks. All you've done is wasted time because you haven't actually focused fully on the one example of what you've been asked to do. So the biggest mistakes I see when I'm marking this work is not reading the question. And it sounds so simple, but I get some really lovely answers that have nothing to do with what was asked and therefore are worth zilch. and make sure you answer it as well, because I will have replies that start off quite well and then they wander off around the houses and don't actually tell me what I'm looking for. And again, that's one of these, if you read back over, if you allow time for that, you should pick that up. Another really simple thing is don't make assumptions about what the reader understands, obviously within reason, but don't, if you miss a big section out and don't explain what something is, it will get picked up on, and probably in the oral, and that's when you can start worrying because you know you've left a big hole in your theory paper. I would say in your oral, if you don't get asked anything about what came up in the paper, you probably did quite well, so you can breathe a little bit. But for example, when I set to explain what I mean, the question I set about studs, there was a couple of answers where nobody told me exactly what a stud is, or what types there are, or how they attach to the shoe. And it seems quite basic when you sat there not under pressure, but it's actually very important. Give yourself a foundation to then build on in an answer, because if you do nothing else but explain what it is, at least I'm not going to pick up on that later on. So there's a lot of common mistakes, but most of them, all the students I've seen have, as they've been pointed out, and the more they practice, the more fluid it gets, and there's a big difference in their writing. So again, it's like shoemaking. If you don't make them, you won't get good at doing it. Now, if you don't write and you don't draw, you won't get good at doing that either. So I hope that's given you a few pointers. I hope you're not going all stir crazy, and I hope you've got some good books you can escape into. And if not, steal your kids' drawing pencils and their pads and start drawing. Good luck.